Hi, I'm Casey. I'm a college professor, and very recently I hit 5,000 subscribers on YouTube, so I thought I would do something special. First of all, if you're watching this video, thanks. Especially if you've watched any of my other videos, and especially if you're subscribed to my channel, because the only reason I do this is because people are watching. Because if people weren't watching my videos about advice for PhD students or applicants or whatever, or even the video essays about my research, not really worth making. So you are what makes the magic happen. And this video, in celebration, is a Q&A. I asked for your questions about me here on YouTube and also on TikTok. If you like TikTok, you should go follow me there too. I post a lot more often because wow, is it easier to make TikTok videos than YouTube videos. So now I'm going to answer your questions. I would say that the majority of these are academic related, and so if you are a PhD student, for example, you might even find some advice-y type stuff in here. But I also hope that you might have fun getting to know me a little bit better. So I'm going to start with something simple, chronological, which is where did I grow up? So I'm from Georgia, the state, not the country, as in I'm from the South. And I lived there my entire life before moving to Colorado. If you're wondering where my accent is, I don't know. It disappeared. I used to have one. I don't really know what happened because most of my family members have Southern accents. I think maybe I watched too much TV. But when I was youngest, until I was about 9, I lived in a very small town called Swainsboro, Georgia. Most of my family is from Augusta, and if you've heard of Augusta, it's because the Masters Golf Tournament is there. And I graduated from high school in a suburb of Atlanta. And before moving to Colorado in 2015, the only time I'd spent away from Georgia was the 3 years that I was in law school. I lived in Nashville. So, yeah, I am definitely a Southern girl. But I have to tell you, I do miss Atlanta. It's a wonderful, wonderful city. And I lived there non-consecutively for about 12 years. So, yeah, I do kind of miss it a little bit. And speaking of Atlanta, what was my undergraduate experience like? Well, I did my undergrad at Georgia Tech, which, as some of you might know, is also where I came back and did my PhD eventually. I was an undergrad in the early 2000s, and so part of my undergrad experience was the amazingness of being somewhere with fast internet. Like, not a dial-up modem. And I have to say, for that reason, the early 2000s was actually a really interesting time to be in school. It was the wild, wild west of the internet, Napster, social media just getting started. I was in college when Facebook showed up, and I loved being an undergrad. I finished my undergrad degree in 3 years because of AP credits plus being an overachiever. But there were two important things that happened to me in undergrad that shaped the rest of my career. I was a psychology major, and the first thing was I worked in a research lab as an undergrad, the Human Factors and Aging lab, which I got involved in picking a particular lab because I was interested in technology. And my undergrad thesis advisor, part of the work that he did was at the Aware Home at Georgia Tech, which was a smart house kind of co-owned by folks in psychology and computer science. I did a lot of running older adults through experiments and cognitive tests, and perhaps a bit ironically, considering that, as some of you might know, about a year ago I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. My senior thesis as an undergrad was about different methods for teaching older adults how to use a blood glucose monitor. But that's how I fell in love with research. Another very important thing that happened is that I took an intro programming class because everyone at my university had to take an intro programming class, and I loved it. I fell in love with computer science through a class that was taught in Scheme. And I also became a teaching assistant for that class, which solidified my love for teaching and also showed me that even though I wasn't a computer science major, I actually was good at this stuff. I took a couple more programming classes. I even considered double majoring in computer science, but then realized that there was such little overlap between the two majors it would have taken me a whole extra year to graduate. Instead, I went straight into a master's program in human-computer interaction, which is basically the intersection of computer science and psychology and design. And so that actually answered this question as well, which is what did I study and what were my degrees in? Psychology, human-computer interaction, and then a slight detour to law school. No one asked me this question, but I will answer it as an FAQ anyway, which is why did I go to law school? Well, as some of you might have heard me talk about in some of my videos about PhD applications before, I did apply to PhD programs after I was done with my master's degree, and I got rejected from all of them. I could probably read some tea leaves to think about why, but one is that I didn't apply very broadly, in part because a lot of the programs that I would have applied to didn't exist at that point. So it's quite a narrow field. Also, I didn't really have a great idea of what I wanted to do, and maybe it was kind of narrow. I don't even remember what I wrote about in my application. So my master's thesis was about live journal-based fan role-playing games. So, you know, people pretending to be Harry Potter on LiveJournal, which is still very interesting, but I have a feeling I didn't do a great job at pitching that area of research as a thing that was more important than that. I also got very, very interested in internet law and copyright when I was getting my master's degree, and so that's why I went to law school. It seemed very practical. I also did much better on the LSAT than I did on the GRE, which I took as some kind of sign that I was more cut out to be a law student than a PhD student, which, by the way, not valid. Some of you might have heard me rant about the GRE before. Anyway, I went to law school, decided about halfway through that I did not actually want to be a lawyer, ... ended up coming back to Georgia Tech to get a PhD in human-centered computing. And someone did ask why I decided to get a PhD and how I chose my research area and topic. I talked about this a little bit in my video about statements of purpose because I read little pieces of the one that I wrote. But as a law student, I was kind of frustrated by the lack of empiricism in legal scholarship, having done all of that experimental psychology work. As part of my role as senior articles editor on the Tech Law Journal at my law school, I read all of these law review articles that just seemed to speculate about the intersection of law and humans and technology. And I kept thinking, couldn't someone do some research about this? Have people done research about this? Have I identified a gap? I actually think I did kind of identify a gap, but it really made me want to do research about the intersection of technology and people and law. So that's why I came back to get my PhD. There's a slightly more complicated answer about why I got my PhD where I did, because objectively there are places I could have gone to get a PhD that would have made a lot more sense. For example, a university with a law school, but I needed to be in Atlanta for family reasons. So I went to Georgia Tech, and I'm really grateful and lucky that they accepted me and let me kind of do the work that I wanted to do. And I'm especially grateful to my eventual PhD advisor who kind of took a chance on me, didn't actually care about copyright, and was just willing to support me in what I wanted to do. So I'm a great example of someone who was geographically constrained in my PhD search. And so I was kind of willing to do what I needed to do in that program. If it hadn't turned out that my advisor was someone who, you know, had tenure and was kind of willing to let students do what they wanted to do, I might have done a PhD on something very different. In fact, I spent the first year of my PhD working on improv comedy. That's probably a longer story than I need to tell here. And now I've got a question about what my PhD was like. For example, did I work weekends? So overall, I think I had a fairly healthy experience in my PhD. That said, I did take 6 years to finish it. My advisor had a lot of other students at the time that I was starting, and it was pretty hands-off. But of course I worked weekends sometimes, but not every weekend and not every day of the week. Everyone's PhD is going to be really different based on your situation and what kind of work you're doing and how you're funded and what your advisor's like, etc., etc. But I do think it's really important that everyone has good work-life balance. If you're wondering what I did while I was a PhD student that wasn't work, well, I had a really good Dungeons and Dragons group. I was also extremely involved in organizing DragonCon, the big sci-fi fantasy convention in Atlanta every year, and that's where a huge portion of my social group comes from. I also had some great friends in my PhD, and we're still great friends now. Oh, and to answer the rest of this question, I had weekly meetings with my advisor. To me, that is a norm, but keep in mind that I am in a lab-based discipline where you're working very closely with an advisor. In some other disciplines, it's totally normal to meet your advisor like once a year. But I have weekly meetings with my students now too. Or actually, once I got a large number of PhD students, I moved to bi-weekly meetings, which actually seems to work perfectly fine. But of course, sometimes we meet more frequently, going up to paper deadlines or something like that. So I've also got some questions about how I decided to become a professor. Did anyone encourage me? How did I decide what to do after my PhD? How did I decide on academia versus industry? Good questions, and I'm not sure that I actually have a really solid answer to this. Like, when did I decide I wanted to be a professor? I mean, I think that when I was doing research as an undergrad, I thought that would be a really cool thing to do. Of course, then I thought I wanted to be a lawyer for a while. I think by the time I came back from my PhD, though, I did really want an academic career. And part of the reason is because I loved research, but I also loved teaching. Again, I worked as a teaching assistant when I was an undergrad. I also worked as a teaching assistant in law school, and of course during my PhD, and also taught a class as instructor of record as a PhD student. So yeah, I like teaching and I like research. And if that's the case, then a professor is a really great job. I also just really like the university environment. It's a really cool place to work. And in terms of, mentorship, etc., I think I just had a lot of great professor role models during all of my time as a student. And honestly, I didn't really consider an industry career. I didn't really even have any industry experience. Like, the one sort of real internship I did was working at Creative Commons. I do regret that a little bit. I wish that I had at some point pursued an internship at, say, Facebook or Google or something like that, but I didn't for various reasons. And I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of industry consulting and some industry-related work as a faculty member, so I've been able to scratch that itch a little bit. But I'm really happy in academia. And in fact, one of my favorite things about academia is the amount of freedom that you have in your research, particularly as compared to industry research. I mean, there are some awesome industry researchers out there who are doing really kind of core science work and publishing papers, etc. But in the end, for the vast majority of industry research positions, it does tend to be research that is related to that product. So like if you're a researcher at Facebook, there are tons of interesting things that you can explore, but at the end of the day, it's still related to Facebook. But no one tells me what to research. Like, for example, at the beginning of the summer, I was like, I really want to study content moderation on TikTok. So I am. I didn't have to run it by anyone. I can just do whatever I want to do, within some small constraints. And have I ever thought about leaving academia? Honestly, not really. I kind of have my dream job. Some of you might know that I am working on finishing a novel, and even in the very, very small chance that A, this novel is ever published, and B, it does particularly well, I don't even think I would leave academia to be a full-time writer. I love my job. I mean, I don't love everything about it, always, obviously. But overall, it's kind of great. And in fact, one of the great things about academia is working with students, and especially advising PhD students. Another one of my favorite things. So a couple of people have asked about my students. I have so far advised a total of 6 PhD students, one of whom graduated in December. So right now I have 5 PhD advisees. It's a really big commitment to take on a new PhD student, and they've all been great. The other thing about PhD students is that they do really heavily influence the research that you end up doing. So this question about what are my students doing? Let me tell you really briefly, like these sort of general research areas of my different students, because this also gives you a really good sense of kind of the breadth of research that I do. So my student who graduated in December, Aaron, is now a researcher at Facebook where he does work on content moderation, which is directly related to the work that he did as a PhD student. And the work that he did on content moderation is really fantastic and stuff that I really enjoyed working on and very ingrained with a lot of my interests. My most senior student now, Brianna, does research on online fandom communities. So if you have seen my video essay about fan migrations, she and I worked on that study together. And she is now doing work looking at fandom as a site of community support and empowerment. She's done some work about people in fandom learning how to code. She's done some work about fandom as a queer support community, and actually right now is interviewing people in fandom about activism. Also, Brianna's going to be on the academic job market in the fall, so I don't know. You should hire her. My PhD student, Natalie, is really interested in technology ethics as it applies sort of in the tech industry. And one of the projects that she's been working on is an analysis of tech ethics controversies over time to see if we can identify patterns and pitfalls. I have 3 students who are all about to start their 3rd year. Jess is co-advised by my colleague who does fairness and recommender systems, and she's really interested in AI ethics and especially explainable AI. She also co-hosts the Radical AI podcast, which you should check out. Candria is co-advised by my colleague Jed, who does a lot of work on online identity. And she's really interested in how people, especially young people, learn about privacy and surveillance and security. She recently published a short piece about privacy recommendations that were given to people during Black Lives Matter protests. And Shamika has been studying Black Twitter as an example of a community appropriating a technology to build their own community. Someone also asked me about the project that I am most proud of. And I have to say it's a little bit hard to pick, but particularly if I think about things that I have led, I actually think that the project that I did about Archive of Our Own at the very, very end of my PhD is one of my favorites, especially because this amazing platform that was built by fans for fans and has been massively successful just wasn't on people's radar in the HCI or social computing communities. And it really should be. And yeah, I'm just really proud of that work and the papers that came out of it. It also sparked a lot more ideas about studying online fandom, some of which I have continued to explore with Brianna. Someone also asked about embarrassing moments in my PhD, and I was trying to think about this, and nothing immediately comes to mind. Not like one of my friends from grad school almost burned down the building by putting a Pop-Tart in the microwave. I don't have anything like that. But I do remember as just a sort of, don't worry, even if things go badly, it's fine kind of example. My very, very first conference presentation, I was really nervous because I wasn't even the first author on this paper. And in particular, it had some statistical analysis in it that I hadn't done and I didn't completely understand. And I remember practicing the presentation and saying, no one's going to ask me questions about the statistical analysis, right? And everyone was like, no one ever does that. Anyway, I totally got a question about the math in this paper that I just didn't know the answer to. I mean, I probably could have looked back at the paper and figured it out. But guess what? I said I didn't know, that I'd have to get back to them, and it was fine. Nothing bad happened. I didn't explode as soon as I didn't know the answer to a question. So this question about my morning routine. I was thinking about my morning routine, both now and when I was a student. And I was thinking about how in law school in particular, I got in the habit of getting up early, especially because at the end of law school, when I was working on the law journal, I actually really loved working in that office. And it was quiet and there was no one there at 7 in the morning. And so I got in the habit of getting up early, getting a good parking space, and spending a couple of hours before my first class doing work. I've always been kind of a morning person, and that's not to say that I'm chipper, but that I work better in the morning. And so now, and this has gotten even worse over the past year or so, I tend to get up really early and get started work early. So it is not unusual for me to get up at 5 or 5:30 and be working by 6:30 or 7. Someone said, oh, that's so healthy. And I have to say, maybe kind of, but also one of the reasons that I got into this habit is because I do not work well at night. My brain turns off at like 6 p.m. And I would rather get up early and be working than work late at night. So it is much more common that you will find me working at 6 a.m. than you will find me working at 6 p.m. So this is why I get up early and I go to bed early. I'm almost always in bed by 10 p.m. So often my morning routine starts with checking my email and a couple of times a week going through my email and trying to find all of the things that I missed. I'm not a particularly organized person. I'm trying to get better, but honestly, my routine in terms of work is doing whatever is most on fire. This isn't great. Honestly, sometimes it's quite bad for my mental health because it seems like there's always something on fire. Just putting out fires is actually a really difficult way to work, and that's something that I'm actually trying to get better at. But also, I always eat breakfast. I do probably drink too much coffee, much now, but when I'm really on top of everything, sometimes I do like to run in the mornings. It's been really, really hot lately, so even first thing in the morning, it's too hot for me to want to run, but also it's nice to have a dog because he forces me to get out of the house and walk him. And it is difficult to manage, lots of different things related to research and teaching and service and YouTube, but, YouTube is a great example of something that's never on fire. And so I actually have not been posting on YouTube as often as you might have noticed, and it's because I've been too busy in my, day job. And now a random assortment of more personal questions. I also apologize, I'm not answering every single question that was asked, in part because this video is going to be long already. But if there's something you asked that I didn't answer and you really want to know, ask me again, and I will at least answer you in the comments. Favorite fantasy authors? Well, you might have noticed my Aziraphale and Crowley Funkos back there. Good Omens is one of my favorite novels of all time. I did really like the TV show. I do really like Neil Gaiman. And I made a TikTok about Good Omens, about those Funkos, about some fan art I have up here, and my Aziraphale cosplay. I made a TikTok about it, and I tweeted it, and Neil Gaiman retweeted it, so that was like a highlight of my life. And this commenter also asked specifically about Brandon Sanderson and Jim Butcher, so I'm going to disappoint you. I haven't read a lot of Brandon Sanderson. I tried it. I didn't love it. I'm sure that I could love it. I just kind of didn't give it a huge shot. So I'm sure Brandon Sanderson is lovely. I haven't read much of his work. I do really like Jim Butcher. I was super, super into Dresden Files, especially like around the time that I was in law school. I have written a small amount of Dresden Files fan fiction. And actually, the novel that I was working on in law school was very sort of Dresden Files-esque. It was an urban fantasy, and the premise was that the main character was a lawyer who knew about the magical world, but it was a big secret, and you could get in so much trouble for telling anyone about the magical world. So her clients were like magical creatures, magic users, who would sometimes get arrested. And you couldn't tell anyone the truth because you couldn't reveal the existence of the magical world. So she had to like use legal loopholes to get people off. So she had this reputation as like a slimy criminal defense lawyer when actually she just, didn't want a werewolf to go to jail where he would eat everyone. So, yeah. I also read a lot of young adult. I mentioned before that I am involved in organizing DragonCon, and I've been helping run the young adult literature track for a decade. So some of that is some of my favorites as well. And really, there's just too many of my favorite books to list. I'm going to link to a page on my website where every year in December, I post my favorite novels that I read that year. And I think that I have pretty good taste. Do I have any regrets? Sure. Everyone has regrets. Though one of the examples that I use a lot, because I think it's kind of funny, I took karate lessons from when I was like 11 until I was about 14 or 15. And I was very, very into karate. Like, it was this whole thing. And then my family moved, like, after my freshman year of high school. And the style of karate that I did, there was not a karate school with that same style where I moved to. And I went to, the karate school that was there, and they told me I was going to have to start over at white belt, even though I was maybe like 6 months from testing for my black belt. And in a, teenage tantrum, I quit karate. I kind of regret that. I wish I had just gotten my black belt just so that I could say that I did. So I do regret that a little bit. How many countries have I visited? I had to think about this for a second, though the answer is not many. Not many at all. My family didn't travel much when I was growing up, or at least not anywhere that you couldn't drive to. So the first time that I was ever on a plane was when I was a freshman in high school. My marching band went to London for the Lord Mayor's Parade. First time on a plane, all the way to London. That was very exciting. And then when I was in college, I went with my marching band to Dublin, and that was it in terms of traveling out of the country until I was in my PhD. And actually, I didn't do that much travel in my PhD either. I went to Canada once. And as a faculty member, I have been to Canada a few times. I've been to the UK a couple more times. I've been to Germany once. And that's literally it. I've never been to Asia. I've never been to South America or Africa. And I do want to. Happy to have excuses to travel more, but you know, it is a lot of time and expense. So I'm fortunate to have a job where I do have the opportunity to travel. And so I tend to wait and do things when they come up with my job, as opposed to, for example, traveling somewhere on vacation. So I have not been to India. However, because of the pandemic, I did give the keynote address at a conference at a university in India remotely. That definitely does not count though. But someday, I'm sure I will be in India someday. Okay, and my camera battery died like right when I was at the very end of this. If it looks different. Last question then. And I think this is appropriate because it's summer. And is it nice to have the summer off? I have to say, a bit of a misconception about academics is that we have the summer off. We do often have the summer off from teaching, though also not everyone, but there's often a whole lot of research work happening over the summer, and also service-related work. So though the summer can feel like you have a little bit more breathing room because you're not teaching, I have to say, this summer in particular, I am busier than I was during the academic year. Which is, you know, partly my own fault, too many research projects, etc. Also, I was putting together my tenure materials at the beginning of the summer, knock on wood. But yeah, it would be nice to have summers off. Maybe someday I will know what that is like. And there are more questions that I can answer, but I think I covered sort of a pretty good gamut here. Oh, wait. 2 people mentioned my dog. So the dog needs to make an appearance. Please hold. So this is Pepe. Pepe is a mutt of miniature pinscher Chihuahua Terrier mix, according to a DNA test. And he is from the streets of Atlanta. He's a very good dog. And that's all I've got for you. If you have more questions for me, feel free to leave them below and I will answer in comments if I can. And also, I will be getting back to my regularly scheduled programming of academic advice, etc. So if you have suggestions for things I should make videos about, knowing that it might take me a little while because, again, pretty busy right now, please feel free to leave those below. And somehow, if you have stumbled across me for the first time through this video, I hope you will check out more. Anyway, I'm Casey. Thanks for watching.